Okay, so I'm gonna preface this video by stating that prior to this month, my knowledge of Warhammer 40k was fairly limited. I merely had a passing interest in its world, similar to how I was when Baldur's Gate 3 released last year. This changed, however, when I needed a game to play in my free time on my Steam Deck, so I grabbed Warhammer 40k Space Marine, a title that released originally back in 2011. And I found it to be a simple and really enjoyable third-person shooter with a great story. Even when I had virtually no idea what anyone was talking about, it was a game that scratched an itch. And from that point on, my interest in the world of 40k only grew. With this being said, while Space Marine had my curiosity, it would be the newly released Space Marine 2 that would capture my undivided attention and start me down a rabbit hole filled with nearly endless amounts of lore and a nearly overwhelming smell of plastic, glue, and paint. Space Marine 2 once again puts you in the armour of Titus, a veteran Space Marine returning to be Ultramarines chapter after a century of self-imposed exile in the Death Watch, an elite group made up from the best of the numerous Space Marine chapters across the galaxy. With the initial mission objective of fending off a Tyranid invasion force, along the way, Lieutenant Titus and his new squad of Ultramarines will uncover evidence of a much more dangerous foe yet to come. Let's start with the opening tutorial mission of Space Marine 2. It's arguably one of the strongest openings of any third-person shooter I have ever played. You are the captain of a Death Watch kill team, charged with the task of making it to the surface and deploying a virus in an attempt to weaken the Tyranids. The ship is attacked on entry, and you are separated from your team, who are one by one killed off by the Tyranids, until it is just you left, standing alone against the near unending waves of Tyranids. From the opening of this game, I was completely sold. Everything about it just spoke to me on a level that nearly shuts everything in my brain off, and the only thought I had was, this is so goddamn cool. Space Marine 2's gameplay loop exceeds at being remarkably fun and almost addictive in its replayability. From mowing down wave upon wave of enemies with the numerous overpowered guns in the Space Marine's arsenal, to hacking and slashing through them with the more up-close and personal chainsword, Thunderhammer, or Power Sword. It all never stops feeling incredibly satisfying to use. And when it comes to who you'll be leveling this weaponry against, there are two enemy factions. The first one you'll fight is the previously mentioned Tyranids, and in the later game, enemies take the form of the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion. Whilst I enjoyed fighting both of these factions, I must admit that I preferred fighting against the Tyranids. I just enjoyed the power trip that came from clearing my way through the near tidal wave of bodies the Tyranids throw at you. It's in this style of gameplay I found one of the aspects that immediately sold me on Space Marine 2. I'm an absolute sucker for the type of game where I'm faced with hordes of enemies and I've got to keep them at bay. It's the same reason why I love the repetitive gameplay of games like Helldivers, Left 4 Dead, and Call of Duty. Zombies. They're the type of games that just allow you to kick back and enjoy all it can offer for hours at a time without once becoming boring. In terms of visuals, so far, Space Marine 2 may be the best looking game I've played all year. There were moments, especially in the opening level, I would literally stop and just say, wow. From the forests of Kadaku, to the urban warfare of Avarax, to the mind-bending, chaos-ridden cemetery world of Demirium, they all look incredible. From what I have seen from my own research into the wider world of the 40k franchise, I think it's safe to say that these environments are all put together with an almost painstaking amount of attention to detail to the source material. These war-torn planets of this beautifully grim dark future are vast and huge, allowing us to see just a small part of a galaxy constantly at war. And when you engage in these large-scale battles, they never feel like these small skirmishes. They feel colossal and almost desperate. Seeing swarms of Tyranids storm across an open plain to attack your line can sometimes be genuinely intimidating. That is, it would be if I wasn't controlling a living tank powered by bloodthirsty rage and unparalleled religious zeal. I've already replayed sections of Space Marine 2's campaign numerous times, and will probably continue to do so until it stops being fun, but I have a feeling this will not happen for quite a while. In Space Marine 2, there are 3 modes of play: the main campaign, side operations, and the Eternal War PvP mode. All these come with a focus on enjoying Space Marine 2 with or against other people. The campaign can be played with either bots or friends. Either way, it is pretty much the same experience, and still very much enjoyable. But I would say it's slightly more enjoyable with friends, especially when they stop every 5 seconds to tell you about the different vehicles found in the area, which they did numerous times. For my first playthrough, I played the main campaign with bots, who operated fine, except when there would be these moments where they would get an enemy down to when an execution could be performed, but they wouldn't do it. Instead, they would run away, which I didn't mind. It made me look much better as I was pulling off all the cool moves. The side operations take place at the same time as the main campaign does, except you're with a different squad running a different operation. These missions can work nearly identically to those found in the main campaign, but with more of a focus on class choice and requiring slightly more coordination between you and your teammates. With this being said, I'm just going to say that if you have no one to play with, just use the bots. They're fairly capable and will actually stick together. Whatever you do, do not go in with randomers. I did that, and everyone ran in different directions and we died within 30 seconds. It's a mess. The multiplayer is fun, but it has some issues that do need ironing out. There isn't much to say about it at the moment. When it works, it's good fun, even when queuing up solo, but the frequent disconnects can be frustrating to work with. As well as this, at the moment it feels quite bare bones, with limited modes, and I hope that changes with further updates. I do not see it becoming the mode where I spend the bulk of my time, as I prefer the gameplay of the PvE modes to the team-based PvP. Whilst I do hope it gets some attention in updates, I do hope it isn't too much of a focus, as I do not believe it is Space Marine 2's strongest or most enjoyable point. I personally believe the bulk of the content needs to go into its PvE mode. Where multiplayer lacks in multiplayer features, I will say it excels in customization. I spent hours trying to craft the perfect Space Marine until I landed on. So I'm happy about that. It looks great and yeah, very intimidating. Whilst I assumed the vast majority of my time with Space Marine 2 would just be mindless xeno-slaughtering fun, it would turn out not to be the case. Instead, I was instantly curious about the world of Warhammer 40k and its various factions and history, way more so than I was when I played the first game. I actually found myself constantly asking, no, bombarding people around me who are far more familiar with 40k lore with constant questions. What's this? Who's that? Why is this like that? And I found that the more and more I learned, the more I could invest in and enjoy not only the game itself, but the entire world of 40k. Case in point, this game triggered something entirely unexpected, and it's actually one of the reasons this video has taken so long. I have been busy, yeah. So this is a thing I do now. So far, I'm having a fantastic time putting together my minis. I had a practice paint of one that didn't turn out very well, but it's okay. My next one will hopefully be even better. You see, I've got the hands of a surgeon, if that surgeon was Doctor Strange. The story of Space Marine 2 follows on from the first Space Marine game, whilst not making playing the first one a requirement. Although you should absolutely play it, as it is a fantastic game that has actually aged remarkably well. As mentioned earlier, the game centres on Lieutenant Titus, as he reintegrates into the Ultramarines after nearly 200 years away, and the conflict that eventually arises from his team's inability to trust this person who is keeping so much from them. I enjoyed the conflict between Titus and his new squad, with his unwillingness to disclose his past out of a concern he wouldn't be accepted back into the Ultramarines, and also the suspicion of Sergeant Gadriel, whose distrust of Titus mirrors the distrust Leandros had for him in the first game, a distrust that would lead to outright accusations of heresy against Titus, and then his century-long imprisonment at the hands of the Inquisition. Whilst the conflict between Titus and Gadriel does take a similar turn, they realise each other's differences and acknowledge them, and in the end become brothers, to a point where Gadriel will literally put his life on the line to keep Titus out of danger. I liked that every member of the squad got their moment to shine, such as Brother Chiron, whose past experiences and personal vendetta against the forces of chaos is revealed after an intense moment of berserker rage against them. Across a very fun and exciting story, there were these moments from the campaign that had me so genuinely pumped, especially near the end of the campaign, when the Ultramarines gathered around their standard to make their final stand against the onslaught of the forces of chaos. It's a moment that I imagine will be looked on in the near future as iconic. I got genuine chills from it. The story of Space Marine 2 is simply fantastic, and I wish there was more of it. I don't have any major complaints when it comes to the length of the campaign. I didn't necessarily mind it, but I wouldn't have argued if it was a little bit longer. The more, the better. To conclude, Space Marine 2 by itself is a game that, across the board, is incredibly well done. Its gameplay is simple but addictive, its story is interesting and in-depth, and above all else, it is simply very, very fun. I don't quite know how to explain this, and I certainly don't mean this in a negative way, but sometimes Space Marine 2 felt like a game that could have been released at the height of the Xbox 360, a platform that formulated a ton of instant classics. Basically, what I'm trying to say is while Space Marine 2 is new, it also manages to capture a certain magic from what came of old. And with all this in mind, Space Marine 2 is one of my favourite games of the year, and I would highly recommend playing it. Even if you aren't a fan of the Warhammer franchise, it might surprise you, and maybe, like me, even indoctrinate you into its grim, dark world.